I grew up in a village of 400 people, that my high school was 32 people,
Wow.
and my graduating class was 8 human beings. Like, there's probably more people working at the coffee shop than were in my high school class.
Fine.
You know, for a school to be shot up by another student and to have access to a gun. We're just asking each other, why do you feel we're alive? It's like there is nothing besides fear that's making me from saying yes. And so that's when I gave my shahada.
Allahu Akbar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of the Muslimi Experience, where we talk with amazing Muslims from all walks of life and find out more about what makes them tick. And today we are joined by a very special guest, one of my heroes. Allahu Akbar.
Too kind, my friend.
We have brother Mark Gonzales here today. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Alaykum salam. How are you, Siddiq?
Good. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm caffeinated, so
yes,
I'm very happy.
And you've just been in Canada for a few days now. You arrived, what day was it?
I arrived Friday during the global flight chaos of the cloud crisis.
Inshallah, by the time this comes out, that won't even be an issue anymore. Because it still is an issue, by the way. Getting flights and stuff like that. I know it's still... The system's up in the air.
It also says something about the time we're living in, where I've saw a time lapse of the tens of thousands of flights that come from the US in a single day, and how it was basically reduced to kind of like 15 planes in the air.
Yeah.
That such a global phenomenon event could be forgotten about in something as simple as 2 to 3 weeks between a podcast tape. When we're, oh no, that was last month.
It's irrelevant. This is Monday. That was Friday.
Now we're within tsunami somewhere in the world.
Unfortunately, So hopefully this won't be as relevant by then. But inshallah, our conversation will still be, because there's a lot I want to talk with you about. My first introduction to you was as a writer, a poet, a storyteller, as a spoken word artist myself. You know, I think the epitome of what we as poets really hoped to achieve was the Def Poetry Jam. You know, like being on that stage. And for the people that maybe are watching that are unfamiliar with that, that
are under the age of 35.
But that was a big deal, dude. Like, it was something massive. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about before that, because I'm sure there's obviously a lot of history in your life. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about where you were born, where you've grown up. Just give me maybe a brief introduction to some of the background of Mark Gonzales.
Yeah, background of Mark Gonzales is currently age 48, about to be 49, inshallah. I'm looking forward to reaching the half-century mark in about 1 year and 2 months now.
Inshallah.
Born in 1975 in rural Alaska. Our families end up across the world as families end up where they find work, safety, and shelter.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not just one stop. My family left Mexico on one side of my family in the early 1900s, around 1916, 1917, came to the U.S., worked in the mines, worked in the fields. My father was born in Wyoming in 1936. And then my uncles went up to work both the mines and other things in Alaska in the mid-1950s. And my dad went later up there, joining them in his mind. Oh, I'm going to join my brothers and my sister who are up there. And they have this job building this thing called a pipeline. So I'll go up and I'll help there. And then they stayed up there because you stay where your siblings are.
Right. So you were born in Alaska?
Yes.
Wow. And how long did you stay in Alaska?
19 years, born and raised, graduated high school up there. I always have this fun story I tell people, that I grew up in a village of 400 people. And we lived in the trailer court outside of the village, which was like with 50 other people. That my high school was 32 people.
Wow.
And my graduating class was 8 human beings.
Wow.
And so when normally you are in a coffee shop and you're sitting around, I'm like, there's probably more people working at the coffee shop than were in my high school class.
Wow. So that's so interesting. And I guess, was there somewhat diversity there, or would you okay, I was going to imagine. Like, you're in Alaska, right? But
Right. You know, we were kind of the only brown family up there. And our family, Gonzales, which was, my dad was there, 2 sets of uncles, one aunt, all in that small village. You know, I had a couple other aunts and uncles in other parts of the state. I remember once a common question we would get is, "Oh, you're Gonzales. Which ones are you?" Because people knew our families and they knew there was 3 to 4 of you.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
so are you Paul's son? Are you so and so's son?
Right,
Are you
right.
so and so's son? And it reminds me though, that's also how we know each other across the world. You
Yeah.
know, generally we get labeled, nowadays by country, by passport. But once you're within a country, it's like, oh, what region or village are you from? Okay, whose family do you belong to? You know, it's the kinship system.
Yeah,
And
100%.
so that's very much how we grew up.
So you left Alaska 19 and you went where?
94.
94. Okay.
94, several years in Colorado, and then California, Southern California in 99. I left Colorado 1 week before Columbine shooting happened, which for those who don't remember was...
You have to probably give a history lesson.
Yeah,
for
which
that.
it was the first major mass school shooting.
Yeah, it was massive.
I mean, at a time where you think of now, we actually average several a week.
Wow.
That at the time it broke all the news because that was unheard of and unfathomable.
Terrifying.
You know, for a school to be shot up by another student and to have access to a gun. I had left Colorado in a town that was only about 20 miles from there, from that school, and moved to Southern California. And it was around storytelling, actually. What took us there was deaf poetry was not out. Poetry, TED Talks, what becomes kind of, the world of creative ideas and the idea festivals. You have Chicago Ideas Week, you have TED, you have the Doha debates. All these spaces now, people convene and share ideas through stories, whether they're short or they're longer. That didn't exist in the mid-90s. It's 10 years before YouTube even starts, like in kind of 05, before Facebook, when we're dealing with this thing called MySpace, where you almost have to code your own platform in order to connect with people. We start hosting these events, which was basically, house parties around music, culture, and creativity for people to come together and to say, share your thoughts, and put it into language. And okay, it's your turn, it's my turn. Those were the mid-90s, and that was the time in Colorado. And then a friend who at the time was like, I want to go to another place and do this. My brother's in Southern California. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, okay, let's go see what's out in Cali.
Were you already a writer by then?
Yes. It's interesting because I always think of like that word, what does it mean to be a writer? Yeah. But yes, I very much had embraced the fact that language was something that was important to me. I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. There's different camps, I think, around why people write. In the mid-90s, there was no career opportunity in writing. There was no blog post and sponsorship. There was no festival or tour circuit. The ability to print your own, quote, CDs, which we don't even know what those are anymore, to print and sell those, you had to go through major labels. Yeah. So you wrote because it's what you needed to do. And then as venues started coming up, there became kind of two camps that I would think about. And both are necessary. One are those who live life to be a better writer. They write to put experience into language, to share things on stage. And those are often the career-minded folks. Like, okay, I want to make this my craft, my livelihood. How amazing. That's something I love, of putting things that are only in my head into language, that I can make a living out of that. And I'm like, alhamdulillah, that's your journey. Do that. For me, I was more those who wanted to write to live life better. That writing was a way to deal with the realm of the unseen. And the unseen, which I think we too refer to often in our tradition, which is, the things beyond the visible world. But I think we forget that there's also emotions are the realm of the unseen. The epigenetics, the things that from ancestors that we carry with us before are also the realm of the unseen. The thoughts in our head, whether they're positive or self-destructive, is the realm of the unseen. And so it became a way to process what is it that I'm thinking, feeling, caring, and believing, and how do I understand it better so I can know myself better? And that was the camp I fell into.
So, I mean, I appreciate that distinction. I think also as writers, there's also, I feel, another like sub-genre where there's the writer and there's the performer, right? There's a lot of really great writers who don't choose to perform their poetry. Whereas you and I, we are stage writers and performers, right? And I think, spoken word as a genre, I think is so unique because I think I'll tell you the first time I ever heard spoken word. I mean, I knew rap and I, heard music and stuff like that. But the first time I heard spoken word, I could not pinpoint what it was because it sounded like rap, but then there was storytelling, and then he would the artist I was listening to would take these pauses, make a joke. There was crowd work that I was in awe. I was like, this is everything. It's a combination of everything. So when you started writing, was the initial burst to get on stage and present that writing, or was it something that you were just kind of writing for yourself and keeping it private?
No. My first engagement with writing was page form. And it's always been page form. Stage was something about how do I share my writing with a larger audience, and and then later different stages. How do we make an idea public? But for me, I very much loved the page. I was very much in terms of less is more, line breaks, formatting. What are the ways you can play with format? And I think there's so much beauty on that and in that medium. And I think we're actually losing a lot of it right now. It's funny because I always push back kind of, I understand the reason for it, but around the concept of spoken word, it's the oral tradition. It's older than the written word in the page. And it's every generation, of course, wants to make something and give it a name and make it uniquely theirs. But I do feel that we sometimes untether it, from the many ways that cultures across the world have always, whether in public or in small, intimate gatherings, gotten up and shared what they said in what they felt. Through voice and verse.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think even from our tradition, Islamically, you look at the poets of the past, Hassan ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu, and all the different poets that would literally have these ciphers, in the marketplace, and some would be insulting the Prophet ﷺ. They would say nasty things about him, alayhi salatu wasalam. They would say they would actually call him a poet. They would say he's a madman. They'd say he's a soothsayer, right? And then you have someone like Hassan ibn Thabit who then takes that beautiful gathering and flips it on its head and starts using their same technique, but to praise the Prophet ﷺ. So when you're talking about tradition and history, it's this is going back thousands and thousands of years, and it didn't just start there. I mean, you're talking about an African tradition, I'm sure in Latin America, all around the world, the act of storytelling and public presenting your art and work is something that, I think all cultures pretty much have in common.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most essential human attributes, which is to express. And I say that not just haphazardly or loosely. I look at us as a species, if you will, and at the condition we're in, and I'm very concerned about our condition as a people and as a species. And when I think about how did we arrive here, I think about why is it that a people that have expressed so much across time, every civilization you see has a way of expressing itself, and we no longer do that. And then I wonder, is this what we see, the chaos, the madness, the violence in the world? Is it partly a result of not being able to have channels to let things out? And what happens when you suppress things? It explodes.
Yeah.
Whether it explodes outward or explodes inward and harms yourself, it's going to come out one way or another.
100%. So you got to give me some insight into your time in California. I know, California from the outside, I mean, I grew up in Canada, but we always saw that as this like beautiful hodgepodge of all these different artists and, you know, creative hubs and you people coming through the town. Like, what was it like for you being a person who had come from, you know, a small part of Alaska to see something like that?
Amazing. I grew up in a town of 400 people, and I'm in a city of 5 million people, of a county, LA County's 14 million people, you know. Where California is the state, the 5th largest economy in the world, meaning if we separated from the US, we'd be the 5th largest economy as a country. And so you're talking about a massive population, massive people. That's why I love the rural areas and I love cities, because they're both have a unique identity. Rural areas aren't trying to be a city. They're like, we're a small town. We're simple. We've got these things. We got complex emotions and we got complex histories and dynamics. But, you know, it is what it is. And I was like, great. When I'm in rural Alaska, when I'm in the mountains in South America, when I'm on the Mediterranean Sea in Africa, and you're in a little rural area, you're like, nature. You know, creation as it was created. Alhamdulillah. You know, I enjoy this. And then when I'm in a city, when I'm in Tunis, when I'm in London, when I'm in LA, when I'm in New York, when I'm in Dubai, or, you know, the ever-growing Sharjah, when you're in these spaces, you're like, wow. Okay, museums, you know, cosmopolitan, different things. And I'm like, mashallah, you know, it is what it is. You know, this is amazing. It knows what it is. It's not trying to be a mountain. It's trying to be human. The mountain's not trying to be human. It's trying to be mountain. I was like, great. Everyone respects what they are. This is amazing. So it was eye-opening. I'll share something I think that will be a unique, I think, twist for folks listening. So if we think of like Howard Zinn, you know, the amazing historian, People's History of the United States, what I'll share is more kind of like looking back 20, 25 years now to that time, to almost a creative history, not of even art and poetry, but a creative history of innovation. Because we have to remember, if you're talking about like, what's it like being in LA or what's it like being in California, we're talking about not only the creative burst coming out of that area, we're talking also about Web 2.0, which becomes Web 3.0, the early Silicon Valley days. You know, we're talking about skateboarding that comes out of a lot of kind of the industrial, rural, deindustrialized areas, you know, and the urban neighborhoods, and the hip hop forms coming out of this space, you know, which originates in New York is what, you know, primarily, but then makes its way there. So you're like, what is it about this place where all these kind of things are coming into existence? And that to me is where we often don't get enough credit to what's at the core of whether it's the poet or the storyteller, the artist or the designer, the engineer or the innovator, that they're all tapping into the same essence and the same human element, which is the need to introduce invention into existence. That expression isn't just about me being on a stage. It's about me taking something that's been in my head and then saying, how do I give this life, and in what form does that take? And then where do I place it in the world? And California is interesting in that element, because you have in these major metropolitan areas these both clashing and merging of civilizations from across the globe. And when they get introduced to one another and you connect with one another, they start to blend and they pull from each other. Like, oh, that's great. What if I mix that up or mash that up with this? Or, wow, we both have this challenge. What if we introduce something to resolve that challenge? And so it was amazing being in California, watching the rise of those things. Also watching the collapse. I remember 2009, 2010, the Great Recession, the collapse on Silicon Valley, the laying off of teachers and of so many workers, the closing of artistic institutions and the defunding of creative spaces across them. And people, you know, people had to find livelihoods. Okay, what do I do now? I have to eat. I have to put a roof over my head. But you also found out who really cares about their craft. Who, it doesn't matter if I'm getting paid for it or not. This is who I am. This is what I have to do. I have to make something. Is my making code? Is my making words on paper? Is my making calligraphy? It's like, this has to come out because this is an essential element of who I am as a person. And so those of us in that time, we didn't have models before to draw upon, which I think is something this current generation has. But the beautiful part of not having a model is there was no rigid way of how you had to do things. It was like, all right, well, let's try this. Didn't work. Okay, let's try this. And so we formed a lot of friendships and community, because when things aren't resourced in the early stages, why are you doing it? Because you're doing it because you love it. You know, and so, okay, oh yeah, oh, that's so-and-so, I know them from here, and that's so-and-so from know them. And you'd cross paths in, you know, the same city, sometimes, quote, on the road in different places. And a lot of us built amazing friendships through that time.
Ever in the slam scene, per se? Did you ever do, like, competitively competitions, anything like that?
Yeah, I was on 4 national slam teams.
Yeah, I figured, yeah.
I stepped away from slam, and actually... it's an amazing medium. One of the things that for me, and I won a qualification for a national slam team in California, and I turned it down after winning it because I wanted to remind myself that the purpose in doing it for me wasn't the stage and the applause. That what I was doing was giving voice to what I felt needed to be said. You know, and like I said, you know, there are those just the different paths, and a lot of the friends in that space at the time, you know, have continued and have made amazing careers, public speaking careers, creative careers. I mean, at the time, the idea of like Nike, Adidas, what later became kind of the spoken word Sprite commercials, none of that existed. And so when those things started to emerge, when larger industries were like, hey, you know, let's tap this into a kind of creative ad buy or an native commercial. They could be either on camera or they could be the copywriters, you know, for the back end. Folks took that as a career path. And I think slam was a doorway for a lot of folks into that.
Right.
You have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And you are going to be judged at the end. And if you think of like Apollo Theater or spaces like that where you're like...
hostile.
It will crush your heart of like, I poured my heart out and someone thought it was a 4 out of a 10. And I just told you about some of the most vulnerable things in my life.
I know.
And I think in one level, it built up an amazing resiliency of folks of like, okay, you know, how do I play to this? It's a sport, if you will. And then for folks like me, I was like, okay, I don't need that. I'm here to share my story with you. And I remember one time a person asked me, a really talented young writer, who was kind of transitioning from slam space to story space. And this is kind of as TED's now starting to emerge on the scene. And if we think of TED, you know, people are like TED Talks. I want the audience to think of TED Talks as a record label for ideas. Go to YouTube, add up all the views that TED videos have on their channel, and they will be one of, if not the #1 record label in the world. Like, we forget that, oh, there's many ways that people consume content and ideas. And so person was trying to make a transition, and they're like, how do you approach, you know, 15 minutes on a stage instead of 3 or 20? What do you choose to tell the audience? I said, I don't think of like that. I said, I think of time. I don't think of what are the pieces or et cetera. I say, I have 15 to 20 minutes with these human beings to take them on a journey of emotion, time traveling, whether it's past or future, you know, idea, fantasy. How do I take them on that arc? Where do, similar in any piece, the pause, for dramatic effect. The raise of voice of this is important. The quietness of, oh wait, do you lean in? Time is just that. Don't think of it as a piece. Think, I have this amazing gift to take people on a journey with me for 15 to 20 minutes. You will coordinate your time differently and everything will fall into place based upon that.
Right.
You know? And so that was the kind of transition out of slam, 0102.
So, and I think it's a good distinction because I think there are a lot of obviously spoken word artists that don't compete, right? They do. So that's why I asked about the slam piece, because I know for a lot of us, the slam, like I started off doing slam poetry, kind of walked away from it a little bit early on as well, because I also didn't like the idea of like almost pitting my trauma story against your trauma story and whose is best, right? It's like actually there's space for everyone to share and for us to learn and grow from each other's experiences. But for what it was at the time, it opened a lot of doors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't talk down on it at all.
Yeah.
Like to me, if you are a human being trying to express something in the world, whether you're doing it quietly, whether or not you keep a journal at home, whether or not you have a blog post, whether or not you're a vlogger, whether or not you're in a traditional form of music, whether you're creating new forms of music, whether or not it's hiking, you know, whatever way as a human being you're expressing yourself, I'm like, alhamdulillah. You know, that's the way you were made. That's how you were designed to let it out that way. And then it's not for us to judge how people let it out. You know, the letting it out is actually a window into who they are and what they're carrying and what they're walking with. And so I just look at whatever people share and just say, wow, like, thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that with me. To your point of the, in trauma and growth foundations, they'd call it trauma bonding, which is the idea of sharing traumatic stories in order to form relationships with one another, which is a lot of what the early kind of 2000 was in the creative spaces. It was beautiful that we had a chance to express things before that were censored or omitted or silenced or hidden out of shame or out of, you know, self-guilt, to be able to share that with one another. But then, and we're like, we form new friendships, but then we didn't know how to form friendships upon the healthy parts as well. And so then when you started healing or started growing, people were like, oh, they're not down anymore. They're not real. They're not authentic.
They're out of touch.
You know, oh yeah, oh, you're too good. You know, instead of really saying like, wow, okay, this person came from this environment or this space and carried these things or looked at these things growing up, and now they're going in a new space and they want to speak about the good things in life or speak about what's coming to them or speak about their children. I'm happy for you, fam. Like, I'm really happy for you. And then it's no longer trauma bonding. We're just friends. We're just fam. And I think I will say the creative institutions have done an amazing job in the last 20 years. There weren't creative institutions, period, 20 years ago. Groups like You Speaks, Brave New Voices, Urban Ward. Amazing. Now you even have like the United States Youth Poet Laureate Program. You have the Toronto as a Youth Poet Laureate.
They have them all over Canada, actually.
Yeah, a colleague
Every
of
city
ours,
has them.
our colleague of ours founded the U.S. Youth Poet Laureate Program, and it's now helping other countries set it up as well. It's an amazing initiative. Like, how do you give platforms and skill sets to an entire generation to share their voice and vision of the world? Like, I think that's one of the most powerful things a person could do in this time, which is to create those space and tools for younger people to say what they like and don't like about the trajectory we're going on as people and as societies. Going back to that, when they didn't exist, that they created spaces in the early spaces. They created resources, job opportunities for young creatives to start mentoring other people. There wasn't an understanding, though, really, I think, of kind of the neurolinguistics and the way of the relationship between stories and the human brain yet, at least within our realm. Right. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, I've seen a lot of growth in that, and similar of trauma and foundation of people saying like, wow, when you tell a story, you're not just speaking and organizing words and phonemes. You're actually activating memory. Your body has a physical, i.e. a somatic response to that. And in many ways, to recount a memory and to retell a story is to relive an experience. Like when you look at like what happens to a person mentally and physically through that. And in that time, so it's 20 years from before, tell the most traumatic experience of your life in public and then get applause for it. Wait, there's some cognitive dissonance going on in my brain right now. To that space to, are you sure you're ready to tell this story?
Yeah.
You know, to the way people support one another, both in the telling and after. To even now how the audience isn't just a passive audience anymore. They're both actively engaged. We now have story sharing concepts where it's about the audience should be involved in telling their stories as well. That we've moved from kind of audience as entertainment to audiences bearing witness. And I think that's a beautiful and powerful moment we're in.
Wow. Yeah, no, definitely. I think just on that point, though, you know, the idea of us as performers and artists getting a chance to showcase these things. I know, you know, for a lot of us, once you start telling that story enough, like for me, I used to just get emotionally drained. You know, like I had a piece that I wrote about a friend of mine who passed away, and I remember it was it was so well received, but like I just couldn't perform it anymore. Like it's like actually you love it, the audience thinks it's great as a piece of entertainment, but I'm reliving this thing over and over. It's like it's never going away. Like at some point it felt like in order for me to even heal, I can't do this piece anymore.
I remember many times, and it became more visceral for me. I think the more human I became. And by human meaning an entity, a living being that feels. I think we're in a time where we speak down and against feeling, you know, and we're like, you know, you're too much in your feels, you know, even now in this politicized, polarized time, we're like, oh, they're snowflakes, you know, they things too sensitive. We have to be, PC, or we can't do this. And I think we forget that, like, we were created and born with emotions, you know, that if you can't feel, that means something's been done to you. And the more you start to lean into that space, you know, the more opens up and becomes raw in the early stages. I remember in those times sharing a couple stories, you know, in times of, you know, I'd write personal. Some people write fantasy, some people write fiction. I would write, you know, personal and how the personal related to the global, you know, because I wanted the world to know it was my community. You know, what it's now become the belonging field, you know, this idea that we belong to one another, that there is no over there. There are only varying levels of here, you know, that in that type of space, as I tried to tell stories that showed those things, I started getting pictures when I would be telling stories, you know, of things we would talk about in history or in the last 50 years of, you know, violence, of supremacy, of these different acts that communities and loved ones fled, you know, or survived. And then we'd always give, you know, voice to also not just quote victim, but like the power and the beauty of resiliency that we came from that. But I started seeing faces when I would tell the story of people who were representative of those experiences. And sometimes I just couldn't continue the story. I'd feel too much because I'd be like, it's no longer I'm talking about, oh, this happened to this people. This happened to my friend. Or this happened to my friend's mother, you know, that, you know, what was in The Alchemy of Storytelling, which is now it's like 10 years old, that piece. You know, we are the descendants, you know, we are the descendants of those who have endured the worst the world can imagine. You know, the only reason we are alive is because we had at least one ancestor who refused to die,
Allahu Akbar.
who then lived long enough to have children who did the same. This is our genetic inheritance. And so, like, I remember in that piece, which was speaking to this, like, of everything we've gone through, and then saying, look, though, we didn't just inherit the pain. You know, it's that ability to endure and then to make magic out of that space. But that knowledge of what we've endured became more and more intimate and more clear. And I always give love and respect to the storytellers who, you know, there's storytellers and then there are story keepers. And I think we forget that storytellers we now conflate with the people on the stage. That's not who the story keepers in any community or tradition are. They're not on stages.
Yeah.
They're the aunties, they're the elders, they're the uncles, they're the scholars. Like, they keep the stories of the traditions in the community and they share it with you if you're open and when you're ready, you know? And so I think for me, I just always go back to that.
I know that the first. Do you remember your? I mean, did you perform on Slam on Def Poetry Jam more than once, or was it just once?
Once.
Okay, so that performance was very eye-opening for a lot of us. One thing in particular, which I just found amazing, was that you were wearing. Do you remember the shirt you were wearing?
In Palestine, the phonetic.
You were wearing a Palestine. How many years ago was that?
That was 2003.
Dude, in 2003, you were repping Palestine on like HBO.
Yes. I had just returned from Palestine. I was in Palestine for a journalism initiative. It was right after Oslo II and the Second Intifada. It was part of what were being called reality tours at the time, which was how do we take these realities of the world that people are avoiding looking at, and those who are talking about it only in a specific way, so they're only talking to their bubble. How do we bring that to new generation and new communities? And how do we do it in a way that just always recenters human? You're human. What should and should not be done to humans? You know, when it always starts with category label, which then justifies, you know, an action or something versus like start with human, you know, the concept of human rights, human life. And so in that, had gotten back and then was invited by HBO to come speak and to shared the poem that I did.
Did you realize how, like, not controversial, but I mean, it could have come off as controversial to some, I'm assuming, even at that time.
It didn't matter to me. I look at life in a different way than the controversy or non-controversy. I start with, is this important to me and the people I love? Then okay, then you do that. And of course you know, and for our audience viewers, it is always helpful to have mentors and counsels around you, because sometimes if you are going in your head, is this important to me and the people I love? Yes, but that still doesn't mean what you're doing is a wise thing. Right. That's why it's good to have sounding boards and friends who are like, nah, fam, like, agree with your heart, not with the tactics. That's not wise. Right. But in that time, it was like, no, you know, and I would still do that again. You know, it's like, I think that it's really powerful that to simply say the name of a place and a people can be considered a controversial thing. Yeah. I mean, let's not even get into any other conversation. We're not talking about settlements. Yeah. We're not talking about displacement. We're not talking about indigeneity and indigenous people. We're not talking about the last 70 years of occupation. We're not talking about historical trauma. We're not talking about the horrible decision that of partition as a way of creating governance, not just there, but India, Pakistan, and seeing the legacy of violence that have come from that decision-making system across the world of like, let's just cut it in half and put them here. And the complete disregard with how people know themselves in a place. We're not even talking about that. We're just saying, here's the name of a place and here's the people. I'll just put it on a shirt. And that's it.
People that they were actively trying to erase.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But so the idea of you wearing it, like seeing you on stage wearing that, I mean, I keep mentioning it to you because to me, it was so powerful. It was actually like, you know, we're just talking about right after, this is like 2 years after 9/11. This is like, you know, the war in Iraq is going on. This is like the U.S. industrial system is actively looking to destroy Muslims around the world, and you representing on TV, I mean, to me, it was just a very bold thing at the time. You know, and I felt represented. You know, I felt like somebody's actually on our side and has that ability to do so publicly.
And I think there's something really powerful in that for me of what you said, which is I felt represented. Another way for me, or how I hear that is, and I felt seen as a human being. You know, I felt that someone up there not just looked like me, but understood me.
Yeah.
You know, and that's to me like the word I used earlier, belonging.
Yeah.
Why so many of us, you can be quote representative, have someone who looks like you in a place and still not feel you belong.
No.
You can have a passport and still not feel you belong. You know, very much our ideas of representation or inclusion are rooted in this idea of legality. Well, I have a legal right to be somewhere, or I am in that seat. And belonging is a lot more qualitative. It's like belonging isn't just being in a physical place. You know, it's about being welcome, being invited, and being celebrated for being there. Like those three. Are you? You open the door. Do they look happy to see me? Did I have to knock on the door myself, or was I invited to be here? And when I showed up, were they like, man, I'm glad you came. That's belonging. Yeah. And for me, just those simple acts, like we don't think about it that long, of like these simple acts of helping people across the world know they belong, not just feel they belong, but know they belong, can be something as simple as a t-shirt that represents a culture or a place or a people. It can be a respect of a tradition, you know, and saying, yes, you can do that here. You know, because that matters to you. And I think we'd make a huge advancement in our societies if we did that at scale. And at scale doesn't mean by doing it through just, quote, a passing of a law. But if every individual in a society took on the social responsibility of helping others feel welcome, would that solve everything? No. But it would do an amazing shift that would begin the path.
Now, when you took that trip, were you already Muslim at that point?
Yes.
Oh, when did you take Shahada?
So 2003.
2003. So that same time.
So I'll give a little distinction. So the trip to Deaf Poetry, yes. The trip to Palestine, no. And part of it was, so I had a parent die at a young age. And one of the things that does to a person, regardless if you're younger or older, is when someone you love, especially someone who raised you, passes on. And I've had some friends recently, their elders have passed on. It's a very emotional moment. It doesn't matter if you're 10, you can be 50, 60. It's like that's your ba, that's your mom, or maybe it was your grandmother who raised you. It's like that moves you. And it opens it's often a very deep and personal reminder, for some an introduction to mortality. It all ends. And the most common response we have to that, keep it moving. Don't open that door. Don't look at it too long. No, I can't hold that. And after about 4 years of that, I was 14 at the time, I was like, I've kept it moving and this hole in my heart is still here. It still hurts. So I kind of have two options. I either keep this hole probably my whole life. A lot of people do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Or I have to be willing to open that door and start asking some difficult questions. Why am I here? What is the reason of being? The question of purpose. And so I started studying a lot of traditions. I think, different people come to Islam in different ways. Some people have a direct dawah person. Some people stumble upon it on their own. Some people come, exit. Everyone is on their own journey, and I celebrate every journey, because I don't know the path that has been written for people. I can just contribute to how they interact with me when they cross mine. And so when I think of it like that on my journey, studying different traditions, I had a lot of friends in 2000s who were kind of mid-20 Muslims who were asking the same questions. I don't think people give enough credit to the idea that just because you're even raised in a tradition doesn't mean that you're comfortable with it all the time. Doesn't mean you don't have doubt. And actually then, because if you think that way, then you make it think, like you begin to believe it's shirk or it's, astaghfirullah, I have a doubt. And you just, again, you suppress it. That's not good. And so my friendships were actually a lot of people who were going through those questions. And so we were just asking each other, why do you feel we're alive? Bombs are dropping across the world. It's very relevant to the time we're living in. Am I here to witness this? I don't like this existence. And going through those questions, we'd answer with one another just what we personally felt. And I would answer different things. And I remember several times people would be like, where did you hear that? I was like, no, I've just thought about it from reading these different things and reflecting upon what do I feel, me. Mark Gonzales is a human being. What do I feel in this moment? And they would say, well, no, we have a hadith that says something similar to that. My family used to say something similar to that. And after about 6 to 9 months of that, I remember thinking, it's almost as if there's a flashing light saying, you've been asking for knowledge. It's this way. And I asked myself a question, and I offer this to your audience, because I think it's a relevant one to anything you do in life, which was then people are like, so do you become Muslim or not? And what does that mean? And this isn't for the audience. People are like, well, will you become Muslim? But it's in anything that you ask that's important. As I said, well, if all the signs are saying yes, is there anything besides fear that is preventing me then from walking down that way? Doesn't mean that I can't turn direction. People have come to the tradition and left. Doesn't mean like, oh, no, it's stuck or et cetera. It's like, what is preventing me from just even saying, yes, let me go that way and let me find? And so a key part of that was actually coming back from Jerusalem and being on the land. And I think any person who's traveled across the world and has been around indigenous people globally and been in places of sacred power, the land changes you. It's not always the people. The land speaks to you. And it definitely moved me in ways that when I came back, I had to answer that question. I was like, there is nothing besides fear that's making me from saying yes. And so that's when I gave my shahada.
Allahu Akbar. Brother, there's so much more I want to talk to you about. I am cognizant of time because you are a very busy man and you have a very busy schedule today. Are there any upcoming projects, books, any products you want to promote, anything that we can talk about briefly before we head out?
Yeah, I can share two. One is an initiative. So going back to the creative acts, one of the things I did with creativity mine was very much, I think, similar to yourself, which was you're like, I have a stage, I have language, but I think of other things as well. You have this beautiful venture, this office space here in Toronto and worldwide. It's a place for innovation, a place for building the world you want to see, of resourcing people with places to connect and to convene. I had a similar question, but in North Africa, for the Medinas of in the old cities of the world. So many of the Islamic heritage sites across the world are in ruin or are being bulldozed due to suburban development kind of models of progress. And so my wife and I stepped into a space starting first in Tunisia, in the Medina of Sousse, saying we want to acquire several of the abandoned buildings and we want to restore them. And we want to show people what's possible with a little bit of love, vision, and investment, how heritage can be a source of wisdom relevant to the modern era. And so we built basically a heritage, you could say a heritage hub in North Africa called the New Medina. Wow. We opened up a residency center. We started hosting culinary exchanges between chefs and residents. We had people looking at AI and geosatellite imagery and predictive modeling of climate change in North Africa and how it's going to affect water usage, and then sharing that with farmers. We created an initiative around supporting olive oil and olive farmers in the region, around connecting with new markets. And so I'd say the New Medina is one. And I share that because I think one thing that I will love for your audience to do is, one, look at the New Medina and don't look at it as just, okay, that's what Mark Gonzales did. Or that's what Mark Gonzales, Soraya Hosni did. And this is what the family did. Or this is what investors did. Look at it and say, wow, 4 to 5 years ago, all of that space that they had didn't even have a roof and a ceiling. Wow. It was in a neighborhood where 40% of the buildings were abandoned or neglected. If they can do that in 5 years, what can I do? What do I want to build? What do I want to found? What do I want to introduce into existence? Because we are in a time where the old ways are essential to be honored and respected. I mean, we can't just detether ourselves from everything that led up to us. And we should not also detether ourselves from our elders and our ancestors. But where we're going is going to require more than what has been. We need to see new. And the only way new can live is when it's introduced. And that's, to me, what I'm excited about, is seeing thousands of people across the world found things, create things, invent things. And then, to me, that's when the fun begins.
So you have the New Medina project. Is there a website, anywhere people can go and find out more about that?
Yeah, you can go to thenewmedina.com.
Newmedina.com, okay.
That's one. You can go to Harvest Lab if you want to look at the olive oil ventures and how to begin to source specialty organic olive oil directly from farmers across the world. I think that's the larger vision, which is we need to connect those of us who love good food. I'm a foodie. with the people who are growing it.
Right.
You know, we often go to kind of 3 to 4 exporters, importers across the way, which is why so many farmers and producers can't support themselves. 80% of the world's farms are small batch, and most of them aren't even able to export. So it's like, well, the only way we're going to continue having farms on this world and not just go to a world of hydroponics, everything built up, vertical farms, if you will, is to directly resource and support people who grow good food. So there's that space. GMW is the initiative which I'm here in Canada for, which is, to me, I think, a really powerful concept in space. GMW, if you think of it as global Muslims who ... global Muslims who found, global Muslims who invent, global Muslims who create. How do we create a network of global Muslims who are doing things across the world? We have a network of about 3,500 individuals. It's one of the few networks that all you have to do to be a member is just come to an event somewhere in the world. We do between 10 and 20 across the world. Different cities from Uzbekistan to, we have a Muslim Tech Week in San Francisco in September, to a flagship summit in Doha in November.
Which we connected at previously.
Yes, which you were an amazing, amazing participant and, and mentor and coach at to so many people there.
I was just so happy to be invited. It honestly felt like you get invited to like an all-star game. You know, you look around, you're like, oh my God, he's here, she's there. Like everyone was there. It was an amazing, like the Muslim Avengers had assembled. It was like dope.
And I think that's a perfect analogy, which is the Avengers had to find one another. They had to have someone to route and to bring them together. They had someone to work through their differences. There are a lot of egos and skill sets. The more skill sets you got, the more egos you got to manage as well. And it's like, alhamdulillah, though, that like when Noor gets centered and everything else fades away. And you saw in that, especially in November, 2 months into the Gaza bombing at the time,
really bad.
that people were really saying, I want to be around, as Peter Gould would say, the like-hearted of the world, and how do I find them? Great, we'll create the space for them all to come and you find each other. My favorite metric of GMW is the idea of meaningful connections, which is, it's not about building a database. It's not about building your networking circle, if you will. It's about finding someone in your life who will have a profound impact on you personally, professionally, or spiritually. If one of those things, and inshallah all three, if one of those things are achieved, that is, quote, a meaningful connection. The average data point we found at GMW Doha was each person left with, on average, 9 new meaningful connections. And to think about that.
I left with way more than 9, by the way. 9 would have been like you were isolated in your room and you just saw people at dinner.
And to think about that, where most of us are looking for one kind soul or one bold person that you're like, I left with 9 people who are going to have a profound impact on my life, personally, professionally, or spiritually. And people need different things. I understand. Some of us need the professional network. It's what we're building. It's where we're at in our venture or what we're trying to launch. Some people just need a friend, or a mentor, or have been looking for a teacher, or someone to help them unlearn some of the harmful things that they got introduced to it a different way. It's like, wow, I got 9 of those. That's what I need. Spiritually, wow, I found 9 spiritual, colleagues, accountability buddies, scholars. Wow, I found 9 of them across the way. That to me is the other time we're in, which is we understand that one is human beings, we are social creatures where we have to be interacting with one another. We know from every medical study that if you isolate babies at young ages, their brain doesn't form right. So what does that tell us? We are hardwired to be connected with one another. And the way we only do that now, though, is through what we think is a connection device, but is really a broadcast device. iPhones, Androids, whatever social media platform, Web 2.0 we use, posting isn't connection, that's broadcasting. Connection is when two signals have an interface with one another. We don't know how to do that anymore, and we don't have spaces to do that. And to me, GMW is that for the global Muslim community, which is, it's an opportunity for us to interface with one another. Now, where you choose to take it is up to you. It's not, quote, that type of club. It's like, now you must do this. Now you must go in this way. I find when you put too much guardrails, then normally power dynamics get a little weird, and I'm not a fan of those spaces. They're for some people. That's not for me. Spaces for everyone in the world. But so it's a place, though, for folks to be able to find those things.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm so happy that Launch Good and GMW has someone like you in their network to actually help lead and facilitate a lot of this work, because, you know, to have a person like you who has those different intersectionalities of art, of culture, of tech, and we didn't even really talk about your background as a teacher and you know, that entire world. I really just want to thank you for your time and for giving us some insights into these beautiful gems. I want to thank you personally as your younger brother, person who's looked up to you and a person who has honestly been inspired by you. You know, I just want to, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you and protect you and your family and all those that you love, and bring love and tranquility to your family and your home, inshallah. And for us to be a source of khair and guidance and light for, you know, all those around the world. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you, blesses us, and blesses our viewers who are watching at home. Thank you for staying tuned this far in the episode. Make sure you stay tuned to Muslimi for all types of amazing content. Inshallah, we'll see you on the next episode of the Muslimi Experience. I'm your host, Brother Boonaa Mohammed, signing off. Take care till next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.